items. And the first one will be the Multipurpose Senior Service Program, which is on pages 5 and 6 of the staff report. And just a little background, we've had extensive testimony on the administration's proposed Coordinated Care Initiative on February 23rd in the Full Budget Committee, just as information, and we'll discuss it again in this committee on a hearing scheduled April 26th. With that said, we have not spent time looking closely at the implications of the MSSP program specifically, so today's hearing provides an opportunity to do that. So we will begin with the Governor's proposal on the Multipurpose Senior Services Program. We spent quite a bit of time on discussing this in the Governor's proposal in last year's budget, and we're glad that the program still exists, and however, as it is, and would like to start with the administration, with the staff. Please. Welcome. There you go.
There we go. Redder. Thank you. I'm Laura Conley, the Acting Director for the California Department of Aging. It's a pleasure to be here today. When the Multipurpose Senior Services Program was reduced, and the program being a home and community-based waiver, we are required under that program that if there are reductions, we can't take reductions in services to the clients that are already in the program. The way that we deal with any funding reductions is that we reduce the number of program slots. And I just want to say slots sounds like a very cold term. I guess an administrative term. These are real people that are in this program. Slots is used to describe the fact that in any given year and at any point in time, clients actually come in and out of the program. So the slot is kind of that set number of the number that we have for people who can be in the program at any one point in time. So bear with me if I use that term. So the option that's available to us and certainly to the local sites is that they actually reduce the number of persons served, and yet they still continue to meet the full service needs of the clients who are in the program at any given point in time. So, for example, in fiscal year 08-09, MSSP funds were reduced by $5.1 million, and the sites were allowed to serve 10% fewer clients to make that adjustment in terms of their budget. That brought them down to about 87% of the statewide capacity within the program. And then following last year's reductions in 11-12, that reduction of $5 million, sites were again allowed to reduce their caseload by an additional 11%. So statewide, that brought us down to actually serving 77% of the kind of the allocated clients that could be in the program at any point in time. One of the things that the legislature asked last year was that we actually look at ways, given these reductions, that we could create program efficiencies within the program, and we have certainly been doing that even since the prior reductions in conjunction with discussions with the local MSSP sites. And I think to the degree that we were able to and yet still maintain the high quality of the program, we have implemented a number of things. First and foremost, one of the major issues that was facing the local sites was our requirement in terms of the nurses within the program. They were originally required to be public health nurses, and it's hard to find nurses, period, for programs. We need nurses frequently who are bilingual, given the clients that we serve, but finding public health bilingual nurses in various parts of the state was very, very challenging. So we were able to reduce that requirement so that at this point, the requirement is that in the multidisciplinary team, the nurse be an RN, that she have 1 year, she or he, have 1 year of experience, and obviously be a registered nurse here in California. So that has provided more flexibility in being able to fill those much needed positions at the local level. We also reduced the level of care recertification that was required in the program, which would have meant the nurse and the social worker going out. Originally, it had been every 6 months, and we reduced that to once a year. So that obviously has been a staff time savings at the local level for them in terms of those visits and reassessments. And then kind of more on the paperwork side, we really looked at how many forms, how many times, all of that do we really need to be doing within the program. So we have discontinued the required use of 4 forms and documents. Previously within the program, anytime there was a service purchase change for the client, whether that was an increase up or a decrease down, the local sites had to send a written notice to the participant, and we've changed that so that now the only time there's an annotation, anytime there's a change in the case notes, the client case notes, but the only time that a written notice has to go out to the individual is if there's some kind of a reduction or a service isn't authorized, which is also a big paperwork change, a savings for the local sites. And then finally, the other thing that we've been working on now for a couple of years, and we've kind of bringing to fruition, is we've been looking at a way of doing an electronic case files for the MSSP programs with sites that are interested in doing that, so that they can actually keep their client files electronically, saves them in terms of the huge amount of storage space that they need, makes it easier for staff to be able to access those records. And we just actually did our first beta testing of us reviewing files electronically at the department level through a secure site with a local beta tester to see if the process that we were developing was working, and it worked very, very well. So we're actually just writing up our report on the kind of the outcomes of that study and what we need to do moving forward in terms of that approach. That doesn't, we still need to go out and do some on-site work, but it would simplify the process internally, I think, for many of the sites who decide to do this, just in terms of their own use of records, as well as the amount of time that we need to spend and take from them when we're out doing our monitoring. And we will continue to work with the sites and the site directors in terms of identifying looking at other suggestions and moving forward on those to the degree that we can.
Thank you. A couple of questions, and I'll ask my colleagues if they have any. And just sort of a general question about how we're doing and how sort of what you've thought about and the administration's thought about in this program, and to me at least, it's, we had the long discussions last year about the importance of maintaining the program and understanding that we had to make cuts, but that this was one of those areas where, at least for myself, we wanted to be very thoughtful with the idea that this is, when I look at my vision of what long-term care might look at as we continue to deal with the demographic challenges of the next 10, 20 years, and then the governor's idea of managed care, more managed care. So all those, you've got a lot of moving issues around this program, and it would seem to me that as we move to more managed care, this should be really an integral part in terms of being a place where somebody who has difficulty accessing a clientele that has difficulty accessing bureaucracy and services, this would be one of the key entry points, and then having a long-term individual who would oversee, sort of navigate them through their golden years. So that's a long way of saying, how are we doing? We're going through transitions. It's nice to at least have the appearance that the administration agrees with the legislature that this is an important service that we want to maintain, but then in my at least view, it's going to become more important as we transition. Any thought given? First of all, sounds like you feel fairly confident that and of course we're going to hear from stakeholders shortly, that we've navigated this past year reasonably successful given the circumstances. So having said that, how do the next 2 or 3 or 5 years look to you?
We are still in the early stages in terms of actually the implementation, but particularly as the plans are selected, we will be working very, very closely both with the plans and the MSSP sites in terms of understanding the population that the MSSP sites serve, the needs of those individuals, the types of services currently being provided, because we certainly see that those are key in achieving the goals of the Coordinated Care Initiative. Mm-hmm. I think really the process underway so far has really at least started the dialogue between the health plans and the MSSP, the individual MSSP sites in different counties. There have been opportunities, I know recently in Southern California, for the plans to actually hear from an MSSP site, some of the real nitty-gritty of the kind of work that they do with clients to actually keep them, healthy and in their home environment. So I think the more dialogue is certainly important, and we, both Department of Healthcare Services and Aging, are very committed to fostering that, and then working very specifically kind of on the operational issues as we move forward as well.
It'd be helpful, I think, for this committee, and at least for me, to sort of have a framework that you might be working on, just in terms of your oversight and where we might be able to support your oversight as we transition through this. So maybe before, when you come back next time, if it's possible, just sort of a back of the envelope. This is sort of how we see our oversight as we continue to try to maintain the program. And actually, I would hope that we would enhance the program as we change and transition.
Happy to do that. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Elquist? Senator Emerson?
Thank you. As you know, this is a very important area to us. There are currently 11,789 MSSP, you call them slots. How many additional frail seniors do you anticipate providing nurse care management services to with that combined $43 million? If I'm understanding the material, there's what $43 million that you're looking at in the budget. Is that accurate? No?
Senator Elquist, are you looking at kind of what would happen under the managed care scenario in the pilot programs?
Yes, I'm looking at the budget proposes $40.5 million for local assistance and $2.5 million for state operations related to the MSSP program. The budget also proposes to integrate MSSP along with other long-term care supports and services into Medi-Cal managed care over a period of 3 years.
I understand. Thank you.
How I'm looking at that.
So that is that is the proposed budget for MSSP for the coming year.
Yes.
Given the the number of the sites that we currently have and the clients that we currently have in the program. So that's kind of I'll refer to that as the status quo number,
Okay.
Operating number.
That $43 million.
Right.
Okay.
That does not take into account, because even depending on the number of pilots authorized, whether it's 4 or whether it's more than that, those counties, moving forward in year 1, the MSSP program would remain intact. The budget for the MSSP would be going to the managed care plan, but they would be contracting with the MSSP site to actually to serve those exact same number of clients with that exact same budget.
What I'm trying to understand is I'm looking at this $43 million, and I'm trying to understand how that relates to the transition of really needing to provide care for 1.5 million seniors in managed care. I'm trying to figure out if there's enough money to do what you're professing, what you're suggesting that we do, that it's enough dollars to care for people.
So the funding that's being discussed here for the MSSP program is really for the distinct MSSP program. So it's actually the managed care proposal under Department of Healthcare Services that would be looking at the entire duals population and the services and supports that they need. So this is separate and distinct from the Department of Healthcare Services budget item.
So I was just hoping to get an understanding of that piece also, but I guess that's not today, huh?
Okay.
I ask the question some other time.
Probably not for me to respond to, but what I would say is, excuse me, sorry, allergy season. For the managed care plans in assuming this role in terms of the coordinated care initiative, even in that first year when MSSP continues to exist as a distinct program that they would be contracting back with the sites for, the managed care plans will be responsible for assessing all individuals coming into the plan, all the duals in their plan, in a timely manner when they come into the plan. And then based on the risk level for that individual, both in terms of their health risks and certainly their long-term services and support risks, they would be triaging them and assigning, providing them with additional care coordination. Mm-hmm. One of the options, certainly that should be on the table is that they ask the MSSP sites to be taking on an additional group of individuals who are nursing home eligible, very similar to the population they're serving now, and potentially be doing the care coordination for them. They could, on the other hand, have another internal care management organization that they choose to use, or someone else that they contract out with. But the plans will really be needing to address the screening and the care coordination for the entire population, not just the number of slots, so to speak, that we have allocated to us under the MSSP program.
My last thought on this point, it does seem to me that the MSSP sites and our state government ought to have some role into the input and some accountability with what the managed plans do. Mm-hmm. I think that's going to be a huge issue, and one that certainly the legislature wants to stay on top of as time progresses.
Absolutely, and one of the work groups that Department of Healthcare Services is setting up is very much focused on data collection and also quality assurance, and our department will be certainly participating actively on that group.
Thank you.
And not to belabor the point, but I think both of our comments are consistent as all these moving parts continue to go forward. Here's a program that works well. And if managed care providers come in and want to eliminate it, I think, or somehow change it, we just want to be engaged in that discussion, because if there's long-term improved quality of care and cost savings, which is what we're after, if at all possible, we want to make sure we fully understand, at least speaking for myself, all these moving parts as best we can, so that we don't lose something that's really a wonderful asset right now and replace it with something that may not be, either from quality of service standpoint or from a cost standpoint. So that's the spirit, I think, of your questions and mine. Thank you, Director Connolly. Anything from the LAO?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jenny Bello with the Analyst's Office. We would agree with the staff recommendation here that it makes sense to consider the integration of MSSP within managed care plans in the context of the broader governor's proposal for the Coordinated Care Initiative. Our office recently released a report that evaluated the governor's coordinated care initiative and provided some recommendations that we won't go into detail today because they have been the subject of other hearings and of upcoming hearings. But I think the one issue that is important to highlight that's from the report and especially relevant to your discussion today is the report also highlights some implementation issues that should be considered before making MSSP and other long-term services and supports managed care benefits. And that issue is the legislature should really consider the level of control that is granted to the managed care plans, what aspects of the current programs are important and should be maintained, or what aspects make more sense for the managed care plans to be controlling, and really where do you strike that balance? And those are issues that are relevant to MSSP, but also to the other long-term services and supports that you're considering making managed care benefits. So it does make sense to think about them in that broader context.
Thank you. There's a kumbaya moment here. I think we're all agreeing. But having said that, I just, as the son of a 90-year-old, and all of us have these personal experiences, and everything, at least that I've been able to cull from the research and information, it's the point of contact for an older person and their family so that they can understand the process they're going through, and constantly feeling insecure and threatened as you go through that process. And this is really, if this transitions and we don't get this right, it's just going to incur a larger cost, and of course the heartache that comes to the families and the client as they try to navigate a system that's really quite intimidating. And here's a program that serves that purpose. So with that, if we have no other comments or questions, the recommendation is to hold open, but we'd like to have public comment now. So sergeants will facilitate anybody who'd like to come forward and speak. And I see people coming forward who are experts at being articulate in a short period of time. So,
good morning. My name is Denise Leiker. I am the president of the MSSP Site Association, as well as a site director for MSSP for Independence at Home, a division of SCAN Health Plan in Los Angeles County. Just a few points I want to make on behalf of the statewide association. Thank you for all of the comments this morning. It's good to hear that you understand the importance of this program, a 30-year-old program that's been a safety net that has done Herculean jobs to keep people in the community where they want to be, a professional network of social workers and nurses, interdisciplinary care team that has been fiscally responsible, marshaling every single resource out there before we spend any other money in order to keep them at home where they want to be. We know our value. It's good to hear that our value is recognized. We believe that in this new world moving forward, things are moving very, very fast. And you can't take a 30-year-old well-established program that has feet on the ground in the community with people who know the pulse of every aspect of that community and take it and pull it and teach that and transfer that knowledge and pull it out of that context in 1 year's time. 30 years of work and knowledge and foundation doesn't move that quickly, and the current proposal would move it very fast. Especially in this new world and with this population, it takes more than managing chronic conditions to keep them at home. MSSP has proven that. You have to look at the psychological. You have to look at the social aspects. Most of our clients are female, in their mid-80s, and live alone. They have nobody. We are that point for them. We also want to point out that we are working very closely with the Department of Aging. We want to thank Director Connolly. Her team has been very open. We are in discussions with the Department of Health Care Services. We want to continue to be in discussions. We believe we can be very helpful in all of this. We can in this new world, but it needs to be a true pilot. We need to actually not blow up the safety net and remove something so critical too quickly if the pilot for some reason doesn't work. Because once something is gone, rebuilding it and bringing it back is going to be a problem. We're here to help. We're here to talk to the managed cares. We're here to be partners in where this proposal goes. But we want the model protected in the meantime, because 1 year of protection, which is the first year of the demonstration, isn't really enough.
I would really like to work with you and the department on that. I think that was very well said, and given that it's moving so quickly, to the degree we can have those conversations, and for myself and if other committee members want to join in on that, because if we go to coordinated care and a managed care system, we can still dictate the terms, and we should, I believe. The legislature should have some authorship over what the terms of that relationship will be, and I would say this is sort of the primary asset in this part of the budget for me, is to making sure that, as you said, a 30-year program that works, that's cost-effective, we shouldn't just eliminate it. And we can for me, I'd like to weigh in and define to make sure that that happens. Not just oversee it, but we want some authorship over protecting it.
On behalf of the association, we are happy to partner because we want to work for the best solution for the frail seniors that we serve.
You know, and also we appreciate that spirit going into it, is that we're going to work to make the overall budget goals and delivery of services that the administration set out to work.
Thank you.
Chairman DeSaulnier and Senator Alquist, I'm Gary Passmore with the Congress of California Seniors. I've learned a lesson this morning, and that is not to share some of my testimony with Director Connolly because she stole one of my points. She took my line, but I'm going to repeat it anyway.
Happens a lot in this building.
I know.
I never share any of them. Once in a while, when I get a good thought, I don't share it with anybody around here.
What I wanted to say as an initial comment was, I've been at this table on and off for 10 years, and I think the very best time was a time a number of years ago when, during the testimony of the Department of Aging on this program, Senator Alquist stopped the testimony and reminded the department that these are not slots, they're human beings. And it made me know somebody up there cares and gets it. Thank you. I'm really here to kind of cheer you on in what you're saying. Ironically, after several years of proposals from this and prior administrations to eliminate MSSP, we now stand with a proposal to explode the services that MSSP provides. let me say it's probably the most poorly named program in state government. Nobody knows what those letters stand for. But more to the point, we know it's assessment. We know it's care coordination, and they are the very heart of what the administration sees as the future of not only medical care, but long-term services and supports. So I guess I just want to make sure to remind you that it is essential that we not fall back and lose expertise and capacity that exists. We will be going from dealing with 12 to 15,000 people a year to dealing with maybe 100 or so thousand people a year once the managed care idea gets implemented. It's a huge change, and it's a change for the good if it's done well, and it can only be done well if we build on the expertise that exists. I don't think anybody believes MSSP doesn't do a good job. And one final point. Many of us advocates are arguing to the administration and in collaborative groups that we would like to see some independence, or at least a fine line, bright line, between the assessment function, which identifies someone's needs, and the spending of dollars to meet those needs, because we don't want the assessment to be influenced by the spending plan. So I would like to propose that we try to find a way to keep these organizations, build them, and encourage plans to contract with them as independent organizations conducting what is really at the very heart of good managed care. Thanks.
Thanks, Gary. If you could let someone else have your slot there, that'd be, I mean, here. I know, I just was trying to be humorous. Yes. No, I was trying to be humorous, but I'll stop doing that. Yes, next speaker. And thank you, Gary, for your comments about Senator Elquist. She's the heart of the legislature. Yeah. You can go ahead, sir.
My name's Alan Masden.
Just push that red button so we can hear you.
My name's Alan Masden. I'm from Golden Umbrella in Reading, and we represent Shasta, Siskiyou, Trinity, Lassen, and Modoc counties. And so we're a long way from just about everybody. But I wanted to speak to the value of the waiver that we currently operate under, because in my estimation, the state-wideness, which is required by the relationships that we have, are significant in terms of our standards and our delivery of care. Because of the waiver, we have a relationship with CMS, with the Department of Health Care Services, with California Department of Aging, MSSP, with the Site Association, and with the individual sites. And so what happens is that what goes on in San Diego goes on in Reading. What goes on in the Bay Area goes on in San Diego. And we have a standard, and the standard is upheld by the relationships in those waivers. If you take the standard out, if you take the waiver out, then you need to put something in to make sure that the standards maintain. The other thing that I wanted to say is we act as advocates for our patients. We have 180 folks spread up and down the I-5 corridor, and we act when they go in the hospital, or when they're having problems finding a doctor, or when they end up in a rehab unit and they need to come back out. We're the people who are there to help them do that. Okay, we don't necessarily go get them personally and drive them to their home, but we make sure that somebody does that. Okay, and when we lose the perspective that you've been talking about, where we can advocate, where we actually can see what's happening and advocate on their behalf, you lose some perspective when it's part of the organization itself. So that's one of the roles that we have. And just for information, we don't have a lot of skilled nursing beds up in the north, especially Medi-Cal beds. And so if people end up going in nursing homes due to this thing, a lot of folks are going to be moving south to get their care. So thank you.
Well, yes, ma'am. Well, why don't we try to go this way, and then we'll just keep going right around.
Thank you, Senators. I'm Nancy Volpert. I'm with Jewish Family Service of Los Angeles, and I will not repeat my colleagues' comments about what MSSP is and what we do, and the highly skilled nature of the professional services provided by our nurses, our social workers, and the integrated care they provide. But I thought I would share one story of one client we're currently serving, which talks to all of these issues in a slightly different way, which is Brian. Brian is 75 years old. He's divorced.
Nancy, before you go through the story, maybe if you can move the microphone just a little bit closer to you so we can hear everyone can hear the
How's
story.
that?
That's
Better?
much better. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Brian is 75. He's divorced. He lives in a senior HUD building in North Hollywood, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. He has multiple medical problems, including heart disease, osteoarthritis, high blood pressure, Graves' disease, and was diagnosed with colon cancer. He is currently in remission, which is great, and he relies on his MSSP case manager and care team to maintain his ability to stay at home. He uses MSSP, helps provide transportation funding to his doctor appointments, so he remains in remission and in treatment for his care. He has a long history of depression, anxiety, agitation, and delusions, and he's highly suspicious of others and has a long history of acting out in his HUD building. He has medication lists that none of us want to have to live with, and he is also being treated with multiple psychotropics to help manage his disease. His MSSP nurse and care manager have helped him stabilize his living situation. They've brought in-home counseling services, actually through MHSA funding, providing older adult mental health services in his home. He is getting therapy to manage the symptoms of his depression. He has a working relationship now through the case manager with the HUD building supervisor. So where he was about to be evicted because of his outbursts, his uncontrolled symptoms and depression and paranoia, he's now in a stable living environment. And he has been able to be out of the hospital for 12 consecutive months, where previous to his bringing on MSSP care, he was in and out of the hospital every other month. He is better compliance with his meds. He is getting treatment for his depression. He is safely at home. And we've arranged for home-delivered meals. We arranged transportation for his medical appointments. And he is now safe. And he's safe and he's stable. And he is cared for in a way that he wouldn't be otherwise. And we are incredibly grateful to be able to do that for him and want to be able to continue doing that for Brian and for other people like him who are on our case services. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Welcome.
Hello. I'm Stephanie Navarrete. I'm the site director for Stanislaus County MSSP. And basically, I just wanted to urge the committee to take its time in looking at this program and just be very careful at making sure that the important elements of MSSP are integrated in however things finally turn out. I've been in MSSP for 8 years, and I was a social worker in IHSS for 15 years, as well as Adult Protective Services. And in my experience, MSSP was always like a small part of the puzzle that I didn't understand until I became part of the program. Now, having worked in it, I just remember different cases that would come up in the IHSS program and Adult Protective Services. If MSSP wasn't there, that small, important piece of the puzzle, if they weren't there, those little clients would have fallen through the cracks. So I've seen that in personal experience, and being a director, site director in the program, I see my staff doing that on a daily basis with those, daily phone calls for certain little clients that they need to have that phone call. They need that contact. And, it makes a world of difference. And we're the ones who know what's going on with those clients, because IHSS, they're only mandated to have contact once a year with their clients. And they keep good contact with their clients as well. But because we have once a month contact, we really have a handle on what's really going on with that client, what's going on with the family. Mm-hmm. And it's an important piece to remember, and I hope we can maintain that.
Thank you. We come back over here.
Thank you. My name is Yvette Benavides. I'm a social worker in Stanislaus County. Stephanie's my director. And I'm just here to tell you that I have experience working in IHSS as a social worker. I have experience working in elder abuse. But my last 3 years, I've been with MSSP, and I understand as the program is possibly evolving that we don't lose sight of the core program of working with relationships, establishing rapport. The last 3 years in MSSP, I can say, were the most rewarding. I actually got my MSW. I'm still working on it, but I'm happy to hear that you're all listening to our program and integrating that as it evolves, and I just want you to not lose sight of our program and how important it is in the relationship building that we have.
Thank you. We won't. Just keep doing a great job.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Welcome.
My turn?
It's your turn.
You can hear me okay?
I can. We all can.
I have a little bit of difficulty speaking. My name is Shirley DeHaven, and I'm currently serving on the In-Home Support Services Advisory Board, which had their meeting. The proposed budget cuts do not seem to fiscally make sense, since it costs more, I can testify personally, to be in the hospital than it is to have an in-home health care worker. My provider has saved, one of my providers had saved my life when I had a stroke. To cut the hours now that are proposed would put people below the poverty line further looking for jobs. People are working 3 and 4 jobs in order to make ends meet now. They're there on a daily basis. When I was in the hospital for 66 days, it cost the state over $63,000 from my care. You only have so much time with the state before they take over everything, and you go out of your home and you have people running in the healthcare facilities. The gentlemen expose themselves. There's not enough to eat. It's where people just give up and go to die. You're at home, there's an independence, there's a sense of belonging and being in the community, and still able at age 80 to help other people. So I would like to reach my 81st birthday.
Thank you, Mr. Haven. You don't have a communications problem. That was well said.
I'm also an English major.
We can tell.
One thing, we have to keep our sense of humor. And I'll just throw in, what did Mrs. Claus say to Santa when he was worried about the weather?
I have no idea.
Don't worry about the reindeer.
Thank you, Mr. Haven. Well, very well said. I'll try to remember that. Is it raining outside? Don't worry about it, dear. Ms. Toth, try to follow that.
Yeah, no. We're gonna
for once, you're not going to be able to.
Yeah, and move on. So, hi, I'm Debbie Toth, and thank you so much for holding this hearing. I didn't think it was possible to like you any more than I already did, Senator DeSaulnier, and today I can honestly say that I do. I am so happy to hear you repeat the word maintain, maintain, maintain when you're talking about what we're going to do with MSSP. And I am very concerned about protecting the model, and I hear that echoed in this room. And so I think that what we're asking you as an MSSP site director, as a member of our site association, as a protector of our services, I'm asking you to do the same and to ensure that protections are in place. 1 year is not enough time, and I hear you and you get that, but I wanted to just make a couple of quick points that haven't been made thus far. One is that I was reading last night 2 different PDF files. One was 34 pages, the other 11 pages, both for-profit managed care agencies, talking about the billions of dollars they're going to be making off of managed care. We're talking about profits, not programs. We're talking about profits and not people. and there's something wrong with that picture. And so if we're going to get carried away and not do any piloting of these projects, and we're just talking about profits, we can guarantee that people are going to fall through the cracks. That's one. The other thing I want to point out is that we do have an incredible relationship with the California Department of Aging, and we sit down together and talk about best practices and what we're doing and how we maintain people in the community with dignity, respect, and a quality of life they wouldn't otherwise have. If you take MSSP sites out of the equation and leave CDA with managed care, you're not going to have that same experience, and people aren't going to have the same programs. So thank you. Thank you so much for your care, your concern, and your future protection. And Ethan came with me and echoes it, but he's not wanting to speak. It's a little intimidating in here.
Ethan, you are your mom's son. Do you want to talk? No? You're also your father's son.
Yeah.
Yes, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you, Debbie.
My name is Carol Eccles.
Thanks, Ethan.
Good morning. My name is Carol Eccles. I'm the director of the MSSP site in Oakland, California. And I'm just here today to thank you all for being so thoughtful about the MSSP and the people who we serve, and to also just echo again the same sentiments of everyone else who says, you know, we have to protect the clientele that we serve. It's really important for everyone to understand that we serve the oldest old, the poorest poor, and the frailest frail. And our site alone has over 100 people on its waiting list. They wait anywhere from 6 months to a year. Our site serves many different languages, and without our services, these are people who would they'd be wasting away in nursing homes. Recently, we had a visitor from Ireland who came. There's an Aging Well network in Ireland, and he came to Oakland to talk to our Adult and Aging Services group. And I was actually happy to say that the way that people leave our roles, our MSSP roles, is generally that they pass away. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually a very wonderful thing, that someone can remain in their home until the end of their days. Last week when I was at the Assembly hearing, I mentioned the fact that my mother was an MSSP recipient. She was one of the participants before I was ever the director of the MSSP program. And as a result of that, I was able to continue to work, take care of her, and allow her when she left the hospital after having a fall. And the discharge planners don't do the same kind of planning to get someone home that MSSP does. They call MSSP to help get that person home. But the discharge planner told me, he said, we're going to send her to a skilled nursing facility. And I said, no, you're not. You're going to send her to me. And because of her MSSP, social worker, and nurse, I was able to keep her at home. I was holding her hand when she passed at age 96. And I tell people that, you know, actually that moment is more dear to my heart than, and I only have one child, than having the birth of my child. It's like there could never have been anything more beautiful than to be able to see someone remain in their home with their dignity and with the people who they love and peacefully pass away. So I just want, to, again, thank you. I hope that all of us will be very thoughtful as we move forward, and that we don't take and rush this, because this population is not getting smaller. It's getting a lot bigger. Thank you.
Thank you. We have that's the tradition in this budget subcommittee is if you feel somebody said things well, you can go like this so we can facilitate moving along.
Mr. Chair, members, Monica Miller on behalf of the Jewish Public Affairs Committee of California, and under that umbrella, Jewish Family Services Association. Briefly, a couple of things I want to touch on. Something that was discussed last week in the Assembly budget hearing that causes us great heartburn is the department says MSSP-like services after year one. So we're very concerned about that. Managed care plans are not prepared to provide MSSP-like services. After year one, if we roll into year three with 58 counties rolling into this pilot program that we have no evidence from because the 4 county pilots have yet to begin, what does that look like? Where are we as a legislature? Most of you, unfortunately, will be termed out. You won't remember. There won't be the institutional memory, et cetera. So we're very concerned about that. Our sites will be gone. Our staff will be gone. How do we rebuild the system? We've been in business for 35 years. We've done an amazing job at keeping people in their homes at a significantly reduced cost. So we really encourage you to think about that. Think from a long-term perspective. Additionally, something that we have a particular site on is cultural competency. In San Francisco specifically, we have a lot of Russian-speaking Jewish community members that are MSSP. They can communicate with their physicians, with their social workers, et cetera, because we've been able to put into place individuals that can speak the same language, so there isn't a language barrier. If you move us into a program where there's a language barrier, they're not going to be able to communicate, and they're not going to be able to tell them what's going on with them, and that's really, really critical. So just lots of things to think about. We appreciate that you've parceled this piece out for us today, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members, Darrell Kelch with the California Association of Area Agencies on Aging. We echo the many comments that have been made here regarding the benefits of the MSSP program. I think and I believe that we can be creative on how to save this program. The administration was able to do it in regards to the PACE program. I think MSSP is another example where we can do that. You know, over the last few years, with all the cuts in home community-based services and aging, we have essentially destroyed the infrastructure at the local level in terms of these services. You know, we cut the linkages program or totally eliminated it. The state has pulled all of its funding out of aging programs. One of the remaining ones is the MSSP program. This year you're faced with a proposal to totally eliminate the caregiver resource centers. So with this, there will be no infrastructure left in which to build on. And you know, we just feel that maintaining the infrastructure is critical to providing services in the future. If we eliminate the MSSP program, I think we will have pulled the last brick out of the bridge that is, you know, that has allowed seniors to go over to get services. So I appreciate your concern and encourage you to continue to look at ways to try to preserve this.
Thank you. I think you should have heard pretty clearly that, at least from the committee, that MSSP is not going to be eliminated. What we're trying to struggle with is how to make it more vibrant and work under as we move forward in good faith with the administration, with the pressures we have to control costs, but also I think the equally as important is the quality of care. And here we have a program that gets it right, so we should build upon it, not strip it apart. So hopefully you've heard that. That's the purpose of this hearing. I think Director Conley has heard that and lived it and oversees it, so we'll go forward from there. Thank you. The recommendation, is there anyone else on this item? Seeing no one, the recommendation is to hold it open. We appreciate all the discussion. Hope we've had good direction. We look forward to continue to work with you. Next item is the Department of Rehabilitation. If they can come forward. Director Sauer. And this item relates to the Rehabilitation Appeals Board. This is on pages 6 and 7 of the staff report. And again, this is to hold this item open, but we want to have discussion about it. Welcome. All set?
Yes. Good morning.
All we need is a button. Bingo.
There it is. Okay. Looked like it was on. So, good morning. My name is Tony Sauer. I'm the director of the California Department of Rehabilitation. And with me is Junie Lee. She's our chief deputy director. So would you like some background about the department, or do you want me to move into this
issue? Give a brief background.
Okay. Our department serves about 115,000 people with disabilities annually. Another nearly 60,000 people are served through the independent living centers that we oversee in California. At any given moment, about 70,000 people with significant disabilities are served by our department through 85 offices throughout the state. Our primary funding is through the Federal Department of Education, and then some state match and local match as well. This last year, we successfully helped about 11,600 people with significant disabilities go to work and stay employed for at least 90 days. And that's kind of the overview of our department. It's been around since 1963. The proposal that we're here for today, I'll get into that, is to eliminate the Rehab Appeals Board that has been in operation now for over a couple of decades, and transition that service of appeal through a hearing officer process. And you had a question regarding the appeal decision process. Our department has 4 appeal mechanisms currently. We have our ombudsman program called the Client Assistance Program, and that's currently handled by Disability Rights California. We have administrative review process, which is an informal process with our district administrators throughout the state. And then we also have a mediation process that's dealt with through the Office of Administrative Hearing. Those 3 processes can go simultaneously or in sequence. It depends on what the consumer's needs are. And then the final process would be our appeals board hearing process. So the consumers have several mechanisms. Last year, we had about 60 requests, 32 go to hearing, over 60 requests for hearings, but most of those are negotiated and worked out ahead of time. In the current situation with the appeals board, the consumer submits a written request for hearing and identifies the actions that the department they have issues with and the decisions that are in dispute. This is submitted through our Rehab Appeals Board office. The Executive Secretary of the Appeals Board answers the procedural questions and communicates with the consumer and the Department of Rehabilitation staff to clarify the issues of the dispute. The Appeals Board Executive Secretary coordinates a hearing date, and then the Appeals Board Secretary arranges necessary reasonable accommodations for the Appeals Board members and appellants, prepares a minimum of 4 hearing packets, and ensures a quorum. A quorum is of 3 members or more. The Appeals Board conducts a confidential hearing and then deliberates. The Appeals Board Executive Secretary provides technical assistance to the parties with legal service support whenever necessary. Then the Appeals Board Executive Secretary records and takes notes during each of the hearings. The Appeals Board, upon completion of deliberation, directs the Secretary to draft the decision, including their findings and conclusions. And then the chair of the appeals board, or whoever the lead is if the chair is not present, signs a decision affirming the decision reflects the approval of the majority of the appeals board of the hearing within 45 days of the completion of the hearing. And then the secretary promptly sends via certified mail with appeal rights, the deadlines, the decisions to the appellant. With this new process, we would change that, eliminating the 7-member board and going to an impartial hearing officer, cutting out at least 3 of those steps for us. I'm going to go into what that would be. Okay. The consumer will submit a written request for the mediation fair hearing and identify the actions in the request of the dispute. The department's hearing officer will coordinator will answer procedural questions and communicate with the consumer and the department staff to clarify the issues of the dispute and coordinate with the impartial hearing officer. The impartial hearing officer will conduct a confidential hearing on the issues of the decision, including findings and conclusions, within 30 days of the completed hearing. And finally, the impartial hearing officer will disseminate the decision to all parties in an accessible format with appeals rights and deadlines included. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Sauer. I appreciate you walking through it. LAO, you have any comments on this? And Senator Emerson has some questions and comments after the LAO.
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Eric Harper with the LAO. We would just note that as your agenda states, this was previously rejected by the legislature last year. The savings in this proposal was relatively minor, $30,000 in total funds, only $6,000 general fund, and but there could be some potential efficiencies through this process, increased processing times, and thank you.
Thank you, Senator Emerson.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Sauer. I trying to follow. You said you had 60 complaints. 32 were taken care of. So the other 30 went to the appeals board. Is that?
No, 32 went to a hearing or process, and then I believe around 23 were settled. Some of those 9 were negotiated during the settlement process. But we had over 60 people call the office.
Okay. So they went through the ombudsman and administrative review and all those other processes before we got to the appeals board. Is that?
Typically, they would have gone through that process. They don't have to. They can go right to the appeals board process. What we try to do is push them back to at least have mediation to resolve the issues. But they can, if they're not happy with the service, they can go right to hearing. It's not an effective use of their time or ours, though.
And how many went to appeals board in the last year?
30, I believe 32 started in the hearing process, 23 ended up with a final decision in the last year.
All right. Thank you.
I think the biggest concern last year remains the same as just the access for the consumers. Knowing, I mean, due process is important, but we want it to be efficient and effective for both the taxpayer and the consumer. And I guess one of the biggest concerns that I would have is just that the stakeholders feel that the consumers feel that. Can you respond?
At this point, we haven't had any communication from the stakeholders that they were having issues as came up last year. The access will be the same for the consumers. The issue, I think, of one of the groups last year was that not having consumers on the board. Right now, the majority of the appeals board have to be people with significant or with disabilities. I'm not sure it's significant. So they felt as though that was a concern that may not happen with the hearing officers. That's not the experience we have with the hearing officers. They do understand disability issues, but they're not necessarily people with disabilities.
Okay, I think that's the biggest concern. If we hear, as you hear, or if we hear, we just want to make sure if we're going to go forward with this, that the consumers feel comfortable with the new process. Okay. Senator Emerson.
Do you believe that number that went to the appeals board is an excessive number, or is that
that's typical? It's
typical from year to year, but that most of the cases are resolved before you get there then?
Right. I mean, we serve 115,000 people, so folks have complaints, and they get resolved at those lower levels, the ombudsman, the mediation, the administrative review process. The handful that typically go to hearing are those who have issues that they can't resolve, that they feel as though we're not meeting their needs. They feel as though we violated the law in some sense, and that's what the board finds on, whether we violated the regulations and law. So it's those that are the more complex cases tend to go to hearing.
All right, thank you.
Anything else? Well, the recommendation is to hold it open, so we'll do that. We appreciate your presentation and your time.
Okay. Thank you.
Public testimony before you leave.
Yeah.
Is there any public testimony? Okay, I was clairvoyant. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move to the next item, which is the Cal Fresh program. And these items, or this item, I should say, is on pages 7 through 10 in the staff report. Director Lightbourne, everybody waits to find out where you're going to sit before they sit.
Sorry.
Yeah, leadership has its burdens, I'm told.
It was easier when I was sitting up.
Yeah, I know. Once an analyst, always an analyst, right? The question is whether they take you back. Welcome, Director Lightbourne. We appreciate your testimony in front of the full Budget Committee, and we appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, Chair DeSania and committee members. Will Lightbourne with the Department of Social Services. I'm joined by Todd Bland, our Deputy Director for Welfare to Work Services, and Linda Patterson, who oversees our Cal Fresh program. Brief introduction on our Cal Fresh program, just to frame it from as we see it. Cal Fresh and the federal SNAP program are probably the most effective anti-poverty tools that are available to government. Research on interventions that mitigate the impacts of poverty on children uniformly suggest that the importance of getting SNAP benefits into those households is the single most important thing we can do. In California, we have about 1.6 million households who get CalFresh only benefits. That is, they don't receive cash assistance. They simply receive the CalFresh benefit. That's about 3.5 million individuals. The amount of the value of that benefit is about a little over $7 billion today. We expect it to continue to climb to about $8.5 billion in budget year. One of the things we've been working on with a great deal of emphasis over the last 6 months is what we call the CalFresh modernization agenda. We've been working in very close collaboration with our county partners, with advocacy groups, with labor representatives, to really look at what we can do both in terms of policy changes, procedures and rules changes, business practice changes, to make it easier for low-income Californians who are eligible for the program to get access to it. Our goal is to really increase real-time participation. Among the policy changes that have already occurred, probably the most significant were the passage of AB 6, which moved us from a quarterly to semi-annual reporting basis, eliminated the finger imaging requirement for the CalFresh program only, and by doing that, sort of removed the last absolute necessity for somebody to come into the office to complete an application. In terms of the and the other major sort of policy verging on procedure change was implementing an effective inter-county transfer system so that individuals who are moving from county to county don't have to restart the whole engagement process with the program, but rather their case can simply go with them, as it were, into their new county of residence. We're working with the counties to create a higher level of likeness or similarity in how face-to-face waivers are being operated, again, on the premise of not requiring people, particularly working people who have huge other demands on their time, to be able to access the program without coming into offices. Want to standardize verification processes and then use our automation capacity that's growing to increase people's access online. The 3 automation systems all now take applications online, and the final counties are embedding that and developing their practice around it. Doing telephone signatures, again, trying to minimize the amount of in-person or mailed traffic people have to do, while at the same time maintaining the capacity for those people who need in-person assistance, who want the direct help one-on-one, to be able to get that through the counties at decentralized locations. So to sort of summarize and then respond to any questions that you may have, we really see this program as being the backbone of what we can do to help affect the needs of the lowest income people in California and the working poor in California. And we're committed to modernizing the program and streamlining it so that there's greater access to people and less opportunities as we go to semi-annual reporting for people to be inadvertently bumped off caseloads because they didn't understand what they had to return when, sort of things. So let me stop there and see what questions you might have.
I think that, and I appreciate that, in the context of your statement you made that I completely agree with in terms of the efficiency of getting good nutritional assets to Californians who need them. Can you explain the participation rates and how we can see the participation rates going up? And I ask this question in the spirit of specifically as we try to remodel our healthcare system. I'm assuming, and the research tends to imply this, obviously, intuitive in nature, given your comments, is if people get the nutritional assets they need, that we avoid costs down the road. So participation rates, in my mind's eye, lead to savings throughout the day-to-day existence of our clients here and gets them to the point where they actually can go out and take care of themselves.
Absolutely. And the benefit, I think, is very clear. To the extent that California's participation rate has been lower than other states generally. To a significant extent.
Let's be clear. Let's not understate it. Our participation rates have historically been the worst.
Exactly.
Yes.
And to a large extent, that's been the self-inflicted wound. We've had a complicated program by requiring quarterly reporting. The research on the effect of fingerprinting on the program suggests probably that has depressed the legitimate eligible participation by about 7%. The research that Public Policy Institute of California has done on demographic relationship to participation suggests that on the natural, because of our composition and particularly our large immigrant populations, we probably have a depressed participation of maybe around 10%. But all of that said, the most important thing for us to do is increase the ease of access through the system, simplify it, reduce the requirements for the face-to-face visits, to the extent that we can redesign forms and application systems that they're simpler, make the adjustments necessary so that when an undocumented parent is trying to get food stamp benefits for their citizen child, they are not being required to answer questions that they literally don't need to answer and that probably serve as a fear factor. Definitely we need to publicize the fact that Homeland Security has very clearly said that the utilization of food stamp CalFresh benefits by legal residents does not constitute a public charge, therefore does not affect later application for citizenship rights. There's a great deal of misinformation about that, and that's part of what we need to drive out into the world. The other thing we've got in California is a very low participation by eligible seniors in the program. So we've been working with the Department on Aging and other CBO partners to try to identify strategies for how we get information to people and application access to people to get them in. Because we have the SSI, SSP cash out in California, it has a couple of effects. It reduces our apparent participation rate. When that's factored in, we're still the lowest, but not as low as it appears. But beyond that, it adds to confusion, I think, in the community that, seniors aren't eligible. No, seniors are eligible unless they're in the cashed out SSI, SSP program. So we're working now with Social Security Administration to try to develop ways to identify lower income Social Security recipients who we can then outreach to. Social Security Administration has some concerns about how that is done, both to protect the inviolability of their databases as well as doing it in ways that are sensitive to the relationship. But we think we've got to do it. The other area which we now have a means to make progress on is the ability of school districts to share information on children and families who are eligible for and receiving free and reduced cost meals, whom in many or most cases would in fact be eligible for the CalFresh program. Historically, that information was believed could not be shared by school districts to county social service agencies. Now what we will be able to do is on a sort of a case-by-case, not a requirement, but we have counties that want to pilot this, and we'll work with local districts to set up procedures to actually get that information so that the county can then outreach to families to at least make them aware that it appears they may be eligible if they wish to pursue it. Obviously, there wouldn't be the next step of auto-enrollment because the household the technical detail, but household composition rules in the CalFresh program are dissimilar to those in the Medicaid program, so you can't do auto-enrollment. But those are the sorts of efforts that are underway now.
Director, what would be really helpful for me, at least, is to have, it doesn't have to be extremely detailed, but to the degree you and Mr. Bland have a specific sort of outline of the targets that you're trying to, the best practices sort of that the federal government is assisting state agencies in the spirit of cost savings. Because I look at participation rates, as I said, as not avoiding costs by basically driving people away from getting their nutritional needs met, but as avoiding them being in the emergency room, being malnourished, getting pneumonia or other things. And then the other categories in terms of legal and illegal immigrants, children of people who are here illegally, all of those things. If you break those down a little bit, because they're all different sub-factors of what we want to get to is higher participation rates with cost avoidance down the line. So to the degree you have that, it would be helpful for me to just be able to take a look at it and get a better understanding for it. Senator Elquist.
Thank you. I did want to follow along our Chair Desaulnier's comments, and his last question to you was pretty much what I was going to ask, but I'll frame it just slightly differently. With California's participation rate for the working poor being 36%, I think there's a huge amount that we have to do for our children, for our seniors, for others in between. And so my comment to you is that I hope you will get information to our chair, who can distribute it to us, as to what you've really done already, not only to meet federal standards, but to hugely increase our participation rate, and what is the exact timeline for what needs to be done that remains.
Well, we'll certainly share the...
Because I hear you're saying, oh, you're working on all these things, and that's a positive, but that's a fluid comment. What I'm looking for is something really specific that says, these are the issues we need to address in order to increase this participation rate from 36% up to, 80% or whatever it is, that will help our seniors, will help our children, will help the working poor. And what is specifically, what are you going to do, and what is that timeline? And if you could get that to our chair. But you were going to say something?
Simply that, yes. I mean, we will share the modernization plan in detail. That has as its goal the increase in the various areas. One of the things, that, just to be clear about, is that, I mean, the participation trend line is already picking up, and so without meaning to in any way say it's anything like what we hope to accomplish, in the last year, calendar year, California's caseload grew by about 9.3%, while the national caseload was growing at about 5.5%. Now, partly that's a result of the fact that our unemployment rate stays higher. So some of that's offset, and I want to be realistic.
Some of it's because we're so bad as well.
Circumstances. Well, I mean, that wasn't a participation growth. That was just a total caseload growth. The participation data that we get from the U.S. Department of Agriculture has some limitations, including the SSI, SSP factor, including it doesn't adjust for immigrant factor. But most important is it's old. The data that we're working off here is 2009 data, and although it's terribly important from an indicative point of view, and I mean, at every public session I go to, I say our participation rate is bad. Let's just own that fact and not try to in any way obscure it. For purposes of management planning and building program of the future, we need much more real-time data than a couple of years old. I mean, that doesn't let you drive program or policy much of anywhere. So what we're working with the counties to do is sort of say, what we do have in real time, I mean, month by month, is we have actual caseloads, and we also have unemployment rates by county, month by month.
But what I'm looking for, as an example, would be there are certain things that technology can do to give you real-time information.
Right.
That's one piece. Another piece is how you communicate information to people who can use the program.
Right.
Is it the best way of communication? And do you have some kind of stakeholders group that helps you to understand how you need to communicate to people? As an example, and I probably could, if I took 2 more minutes, which I'm not going to on this, I could list 5 or 10 other things, but I'm looking for a process that you will explain to our chair.
And we will get that.
Because I'm sure our participation rate is not 75%.
No, of course.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, so we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
Mr. Lightbourne, I think what I'm looking for, and I think I hear this from Senator Alquist as well, is we want a plan to get our participation rates significantly higher that allow for cost savings as we move to this new model. And the outreach should be part of that. And if there are differences between excuses and explanations, if there are things that are legitimately different about us, we are sensitive to that, want to understand that, because that goes to our collective ultimate goal of getting higher participation rates. But, and I'm not saying I'm hearing excuses, I just want to be very clear to you, we're going to hold your feet to the fire. We expect the participation rates to go up with the ability for us to understand that there are other things that are contributing to the explanation. Understood?
Totally understood, Senator. The one thing I would, of course, observe is that we're not budgeting increased outreach funding. So the partnership that we're building, counties, CBOs, advocates, et cetera, we have to figure out how we get this done within the resources available. Now, we're not saying that the resources aren't available, but we're saying it's got to be a reprioritization of things we're doing now. And so that's part of the dynamic struggle that we've got and we've set for ourselves.
I'll remind you that the legislature has the ability to either take money away in the governor's proposal or add to it or shift it. So if you came back with a proposal that suggested that a little bit of upfront money would help you based on the experience of other jurisdictions, either whether that be outside of the state or counties who do it well. And I'm reminded when I was a county supervisor when we started the Healthy Families program, where we had a cultural problem, at least in Contra Costa County, of accessing a certain population, and we actually went to the faith communities, and we saw immediately with a very little upfront money, we got more clients into that, which benefited everybody. So this is a really good discussion. And, you know, given that for a long time, since we don't use food stamps anymore, this country was very absorbed with, correctly, I think, fraud in the system, and the degree that we've been able to minimize that and make it more efficient. But ultimately, the system works best. I know I'm being redundant. You know this better than I do, if we get clients in the program. Senator Emerson?
Thank you. Mr. Lightbourne, I'm hoping he's speaking figuratively about holding your feet to the fire, so, but I know my colleague.
I was slipping back to when I was a registered Republican. I mean that now as a...
We talk about the participation rate. What is the total population in the state of California in terms of numbers that are eligible for CalFresh?
That's a good question. It's probably about 6 million, just very round numbers. Let's say 6 million.
And we're roughly...
We're at best 58% of that is getting the benefit now.
I get you. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'm sorry, I jumped a little bit ahead. Do we have anything from the legislative analyst?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brian Euler from the LAO. I'll be brief, just speaking directly to the request for increased, or the governor's proposal with regards to the administrative budget for CalFresh. We support the staff recommendation as outlined in your agenda. We do have one note: the $38 million total for enacting recent legislation that's been requested by the governor is about $7 million above what was scored in the bill, the final bill analyses for this legislation when it was enacted last year.
Anything else from my colleagues? If not, we'll go to public comment. Mr. Mecca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Frank Mecca with the County Welfare Directors Association. We very strongly agree with and align ourselves with what Director Lightbourne indicated about ownership of the participation rate, our involvement in all of the modernization efforts with the administration. So I won't repeat everything that Mr. Lightbourne said. I will say that this is an extremely important program to us, and we've been proud of the fact that we added 1.3 million people to the rolls between 2007 and 2010, a 65% increase in the number of people getting this benefit in a very constrained resources environment. But we aren't satisfied, and so we are as committed to the modernization agenda and improving outreach as we know the administration is as well, and we want to be part of the dialogue, getting the committee the information that they want to make sure that the plan is an adequate one and is achieving results. I do have to say that, particularly if you look at our rate, I do think it's the case that because we're unlike other states in that we cash in SSI recipients, it really depresses our rate and it enhances our costs. But that doesn't explain, admittedly, the working poor rate. And for working poor people, this is a particularly important benefit. And I would agree with Mr. Lightbourne. We have not had a working poor friendly agenda. And there are a lot of things underway and that we can do to improve the accessibility of this program to the working poor, including modernizing our own computer systems at the local level so that people can apply online, report changes online. I do believe that our biggest challenge in California, given our disproportionately large immigrant population, is going to be effective outreach with very limited resources to a community that's very wary of accessing public benefits, in large part because of a culture and a message of demonization of people who take advantage of government programs. That's been a legacy in California. And that, I believe it's going to be the most difficult part of our job, and probably the part of our job that we're going to have to be the most diligent and most creative. The last thing, I would just like to put a request to the committee. I think we're going to talk about it on another agenda. But as part of the food stamps, CalFresh administration, in 2010-11, we requested, you agreed, and the administration agreed, to have a partial waiver of the county financial match requirement to access our allocation for CalFresh administration. Caseloads are skyrocketing, and they were outpacing the county ability to come up with a local match to match state resources. And so you agreed for 2 years that as long as the counties met a maintenance of effort requirement, that the counties could access the increased funds without additional match. And that has been very important to 24 counties, including Los Angeles, who otherwise would have had to leave millions of dollars on the table that are necessary to improve the performance of this program. We'd hoped the economy would have rebounded faster, but it hasn't, and local revenues are still very constrained. And so we would like to just put the request out there for a temporary extension for 2 more years of that match waiver, the absence of which I think would result in a lot of counties leaving resources on the table that we need to do the job that you rightfully expect.
Thank you, Mr. Becca. Mr. Harold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike Carroll with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. I want to largely echo the comments of Mr. Mecca. I think we have a ways to go, clearly, to move our work participation rate up. But I want to underscore and kind of address the question raised by Senator Ahlquist, which I think is an important one, which is, what are we really doing on the ground substantively to move this rate up? And I just want to remind that, their AB 6, which finally passed last year, had been bottled up for many years here. We could not reach an agreement. And there was, broad agreement with counties and advocates and many members of the legislature that we needed to advance semi-annual reporting and other features. That's going to really unclog the bottleneck that we've had in the program for a long time. Those 3 provisions were very major, along with Senator Liu's bill last year, SB 43, which also was signed by the governor. So I think we will see those numbers going up as the data comes in, and we finally have kind of broken through that. We look forward to working with the director as we go forward on implementing those programs and looking at additional ways to engage the working poor. And then the last thing I would just like to remind the committee or put out there is we still have a state law that bars the ability of people who come out of our criminal justice system to get CalFresh benefits. AB 828 is sitting on the Senate Appropriations Committee. It was held last year. It's been held before by this House. And I think if we want to undo one other piece that we've still got out there, we need to either move AB 828 or we have to find a way to do it during the budget process. But I think providing assistance for people who have drug felony convictions who are now being moved, who are coming out of the system, we need to provide that basic nutritional assistance so that they do not fall back into the criminal justice system upon release. So that's not only in our interest, but it's the right thing to do for these folks, and it's another way we can raise our participation rates even more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrell. Next. And what we'll try to keep the comments to a couple minutes. What I'm hoping to do is get to the next item, IHSS, and then we're scheduled to take a break and then come back. So if we can help facilitate that, it would be much appreciated.
Good morning. My name is Carrie Bernbach with California Food Policy Advocates. The department has taken on several initiatives, and they're great initiatives to improve CalFresh participation, and we want to applaud that work so far. However, we want to challenge them to do more. To boost participation, all online and paper applications should be uniform and simple. In September 2011, the department convened a work group to assess current applications, and we'd like to see that work group reconvene to simplify them even further. To increase participation, there needs to be consistency across and within counties through rigorous statewide CalFresh rules. We have 3 separate computer systems used to administer CalFresh, and eliminating them down to one would help ensure consistency and make program improvements more efficient. To boost participation, we need to build awareness around the different ways that people can apply for CalFresh, including exploring public and private partnerships to further the new CalFresh brand and name. In regards to the Refresh initiative, CFPA would like to see the department establish benchmarks and data points to evaluate improvements. We need to be able to track our progress with specific initiatives. Regarding implementation of last year's legislation, AB 69 is set for implementation in July 2012. And although, in part because of SSA, the progress has been a little slow, we need to move forward with a small group of counties, with a small work group of counties, and really figure out what next steps we can take to make implementation happen in July. In terms of AB 6, we'd like to hear more details regarding the implementation of the Heat and Eat initiative. And lastly, we would like to see the department elaborate on their plan to integrate CalFresh with healthcare reform. It's a huge opportunity, and we've seen little discussion around how the sort of initiatives, the Refresh initiatives we've heard today, complement and fit in with that larger opportunity. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Kevin Esdin. I'm with the Coalition of California Welfare Rights Organizations, and we've been working very closely with the department regarding the implementation of making changes to enhance the participation in the food stamp program. One of the issues that came up is whether are we going to say 80% or 83% or whatever, and all I remember is the stimulus thing. When Obama said 8% and he didn't get, and the unemployment went up, and they're still beating us up on that. So we advocated that don't come up with 80% or 85%. We have a goal to increase the rates, and we want to do that, and I think we're all committed to do that. So regarding food stamp outreach, we used to have a very robust food stamp outreach during Jerry Brown 1, which was a grassroots, community-based food stamp outreach system. And it would be nice. Right now, the food stamp outreach is really not that robust and grassroots, community-based. And if you have a community-based food stamp outreach system that a whole bunch of CBOs are participating in and helping people go through the process, that will help. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else on this item? Mr. Light, or Director Lightborn, I should say, thank you for your testimony. And I do think this, in the spirit of the testimony, congratulations to all the good work you've done. We want to work with you to make sure that the program's successful. So I hope you take our comments in that spirit, and we will continue to work with you. So the recommendation is, colleagues, to approve the changes to the budget for CalFresh administration outlined in the agenda, except for the adjustment related to county expenditure patterns, which will be held open, and we can have the discussion with Mr. Mecca and his constituent groups. And the record will show Senator Elquist and Saunier as an aye. Senator Emerson? Okay, Senator Emerson is a no. Thank you all very much. So we'll move to the next item. Item number 2, in-home support services. This is proposed restrictions on domestic and related services. We're going to, what I'm going to attempt to do is have the report. What we're scheduled to do is actually take a break at 12 till 1 for lunch. We may run a few minutes after that. So we'll take this so the public knows, most likely public comment. Well, the public comment will be when we come back at 1 o'clock. So that's what we're going to attempt to do right now. And if we can do 2, maybe we'll do the IHSS as a presentation and move to the next one if we can. We'll see how it goes.
Again, thank you. I'm joined by Aveen Carroll, the Deputy Director, Adult Program Division. The IHSS proposals in our budget for purposes of today really sort of focus on the proposal this year to eliminate domestic-related services for those living in a shared living environment. Before I pass it on to Ms. Carroll, if I could just sort of anticipate one of the questions that was sort of placed before us was the apparent inconsistency with both planning for a modernization managed care environment and then having a reduction a target, including also the 20% across the board target, which is out there. Just to reiterate, the reduction targets are clearly a product of budget pressure. The 20% being the trigger from last year, the domestic-related being for this year, to the extent that in other dialogues and conversations and budget actions, we're able to make IHSS a benefit under managed care Medicaid, then our expectation and belief is that we can actually maintain the program on a more robust basis than the current funding environments have allowed us to do. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Director Lightbourne and Mr. Chair. As Director Lightbourne just pointed out, that this proposal is related to the current fiscal situation that California is facing. The administration is proposing to restrict the IHSS hours for domestic and related services to recipients residing in a shared living arrangement effective July 1st, 2012. Domestic and related services include more your custodial type services, your housework, your meal preparation and cleanup, your laundry, shopping for food, and household errands. This restriction is solely for services that are currently met in common with members of their household. However, there are exceptions that are being allowed. One of them is that the housemate can substantiate a physical or mental impairment. And this can be done by social worker observation of this condition. It also can be done through a medical certification. The other exemption is that if you are a household and you are only IHSS recipients, you would also be exempted. Now, to help address some of the committee's questions, I want to just briefly sort of review the process that a social worker would go through so we can kind of get to some of those questions. The social worker process to determine the restrictions and the exemptions includes, first they have to determine, are the services the domestic and related, and are they being met in common? Secondly, they're going to look at, if it's met in common, they will look at the household members and their ability to perform the services. Now, the presumption is that the individual is able to perform the services. However, the recipient or their housemate can rebut that presumption for physical or mental impairments only. So you can't rebut availability, you can't rebut unwillingness to perform. However, the issue of availability is addressed in a different manner. It's addressed through the social worker's assessment process that they use to determine proration of hours, so which takes availability into account already. If there is no one available to do the service in the household, you can't prorate the hours. So in this situation, there would be no reduction. The only thing I can say about the unwillingness is IHSS recipients, their service providers are well over 80% family and friends. And the majority live with their providers. And if a service is being met in common today, it's unlikely that someone in that household with those relationships would not vacuum the living room or refuse to make a dinner. The committee's also asked, does the presumption that domestic and related services are met in common extend to areas of the house not shared, such as a bedroom or the individual's bathroom? It does not extend to those personal areas. If it's not a shared living area, it's excluded. The other part of the question was, what about the responsibilities that are not shared? In other words, laundering for recipient sheets. One of the things that I would point out is the laundering is done in common. So in other words, the whole family's household laundering is being done together. Then it's a need being met in common. However, I would point out that this proposal does not apply in situations where the recipient has a specific need for a service that cannot be met in common. For example, you're an IHSS recipient, there are issues with incontinence, and your laundry has to be done more frequently or separately. That would not be addressed under this proposal. It wouldn't be restricted, and it wouldn't be considered being done in common. Finally, the question in the committee asked about what analysis has the department done around the legal considerations. At this point, CDSS and the Department of Health Care Services are in constant discussion over this issue, and we're working through the analysis. We're also developing a state plan amendment to present to CMS for their consideration and discussion. And at this point, that's as far as that analysis has gone. Just some basic facts. The budget assumes a $206.2 million general fund savings in 12-13 for this proposal. The monthly average reduction for recipients who have their services being met in common would be 14 hours a month, and that would affect about 245,000 of the current recipients. The monthly average for individuals who have some domestic and related services that are not met in common. Remember, when we're talking about domestic and related, it's 7 different services. Some of them can be met in common, some can't. For that population, we're looking at just under 9 hours monthly reduction for those cases, and that's about 80,000 recipients. And finally, I would just say that this proposal does not affect any IHSS authorized hours for personal care services, protective supervision, paramedical services, and the recipient's direct health care needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Anything from the Legislative Analyst Office?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We recently released an analysis of the administration's proposal as it relates to domestic and related care services, and we raised several concerns with the change. They generally fall into 3 categories: of one being legal concerns, the other being policy concerns, and thirdly, implementation concerns. On the legal concerns front, we, as noted in your agenda, have pointed out in the past that Washington State did have a shared living rule that was ultimately decided by the Washington State Supreme Court to not be within the requirements of federal Medicaid rules, that recipients be treated equally. And admittedly, the administration's proposal is different from Washington State's in some regards, but there are some similarities there that we think present some of those same legal risks. Additionally, as with any time you reduce home and community-based programs, there is some risk that reduction could be litigated, as the people may assert that the absence of those services could put them at risk of being placed in an institution which could violate the Americans with Disabilities Act. Our policy concerns really are related to what Ms. Carroll touched upon, that roommates may not have an obligation to provide those services for those that they live, for the IHSS recipient that they live with. In some cases, they may be closely related to that recipient. In other cases, they may just be living together for purposes of affordable rent. And finally, on the implementation front, there is this exception that if the roommate is not mentally or physically able to perform those tasks, that the reduction would not apply to that person. But we have concerns with how exactly a social worker would go about making that observation, whether it's a different assessment process, whether there would be a different tool they would have to use, or how exactly that process would take place. Given these concerns, we do present the legislature with some alternatives to consider, and admittedly, these alternatives also have some risk and some implementation issues and real impacts on recipients that you would need to consider, but in our opinion, they may present less legal challenges and implementation challenges. The first of those is the extension of the 3.6% across-the-board reduction, which was adopted as part of the 2010-11 budget and is set to expire at the end of the current year. So one option would be to extend that. The other option would be to reenact a reduction in the state participation in provider wages. As you know, as part of the 2009-10 budget, the legislature did reduce state participation in provider wages from $12.10 per hour to $10.10 per hour, but was not ultimately able to implement that reduction because a federal judge issued an injunction preventing the state from implementing that reduction because the state, one of the reasons being the state had not first conducted an analysis that looked at how that reduction would impact recipient access to services. Subsequently, the administration did receive funding to conduct that analysis. So we would suggest that you consider reenacting a reduction in state participations to a level that this study determines would not impact access to services. At this point, the administration indicates that this study is not available.
Carol, did you want to respond or? No. Okay. Senators, sorry, I was reading your body language incorrectly. Senator Emerson.
Yeah. In light of the discussion by the LAO, I was wondering that the department did receive funding to do a study. When can the legislature see the results of that study?
Senator, it's still under review, and it's sort of within the context of litigation strategy, which I can't predict.
Litigation strategy. Okay, thank you. We'll talk later.
He's a quick study. Okay. Well, it's very difficult doing this effectively, and I commend you for all of your efforts. We'll continue to work on it. The recommendation for this item is to hold open, and that we will have public hearing, as I said earlier, after the break. But let's move on to the next item: medication dispensing machines, MDMs. Are we prepared to move to this one, or was it the expectation we'd hear this one after the break?
I don't see Director Douglas.
We don't see Director Douglas, so. Do you want to speak for him?
There he is.
Oh, there he is. It's too bad. We were about to have Ms. Carroll speak for you, Mr. Douglas, which she seemed very anxious to do that.
No, thank you.
Mr. Douglas, welcome. That was a very dramatic entrance. And as someone who likes to make those...
No, I don't. Apologize for that. Toby Douglas,
okay.
Director of the Department of Healthcare Services. Last year, as part of the budget, the legislature and the governor enacted the medication dispensing pilot project as a way to generate cost savings within the budget of roughly $140 million in general fund savings, as well as a way to reduce nursing facility stays, hospital admissions, as well as emergency care. And we were charged, the Department of Healthcare Services was charged with working to implement this pilot. And as part of the implementation, we had to conduct an assessment of ways to design this pilot program to provide an opportunity for very vulnerable Medi-Cal populations, those that are both on Medi-Cal as well as on the Medicare program, what we call our dual eligibles, to have a process to improve their adherence with prescribed medications. And there had been the belief that through these medication dispensing machines, which include remote monitoring and telephonic processes, that there would be a reduction in inappropriate utilization. So we began with a stakeholder process working with various groups as well as vendors and got technical stakeholders together to determine the design, the study population. At the same time, we also worked with the California Medicaid Research Institute and UC Davis on an evaluation of how could we design this pilot project to get the most savings. And through that process, what UC Davis uncovered is, one, there weren't very many studies that had truly looked at this type of adherence and what the potential savings. We also found that based on some of the assumptions that were made originally, once you looked at what were the potential, in essence, levers or ways that we could reduce inappropriate utilization related to the dispensing machines, that the likely reduction, especially in nursing facilities, was going to be a lot lower than what had been assumed for the $140 million. So based on the study, it found the savings were highly uncertain, and it was a good chance that we would actually spend money on the cost of these machines, because we would also have to go with a lot larger population than had originally been projected. The original assumptions assumed a small target population that would generate large reductions in utilization. The studies presented that we would probably have to target a bigger population and receive smaller savings and most likely no savings. So based on that, the administration determined that we shouldn't move forward with the pilot, and we are asking to eliminate the trailer bill related to this pilot, and that also eliminates the triggers that were tied to this pilot for reductions in in-home supportive services, which is why I'm at your committee, which I wouldn't normally be at. So any questions?
Let's start with the LAO. Go to the LAO first, and then Senator Emerson has some questions, I know.
Thank you. Since the enactment of this pilot project, our office has had concerns with whether the estimated savings were actually achievable. And in fact, when we published our November 2011 five-year forecast of the budget, we did not assume any savings in the current year from the implementation of this pilot project. We have reviewed the study that Mr. Douglas has mentioned today, and we agree that it indicates that the savings are highly uncertain and could potentially result in costs. And as such, we have no concerns with the administration's proposal to cancel the pilot project.
Thank you. Senator Emerson.
Mr. Douglas, are any other states using medication dispensing machines in nursing homes, to your knowledge?
What our studies found is that they're being used on a very, very small, limited scale, nothing like what we had been what was proposed under this. That there are some areas where, under home and community use waivers in other states, there might be, instances where they're using these dispensing machines in the home, but nothing on the scale or magnitude or to generate the savings that we're talking about. When we did talk about the vendors, none of the vendors had the numbers that we of machines that we would need to put in the homes. None of them actually even at the time had that many machines readily available. So it would be something that would be way larger and hadn't been undertaken before.
Yeah, the only medication dispensing machines that I'm aware of are used in hospitals. They're very large, large application devices. But you've actually seen these devices in homes?
Yeah, it's a new technology that are in homes. I myself have not seen it, but my staff, they met with various vendors who showed these devices, and they would be put in the home. They're an automated system that's in the home that helps dispense the medications, keeps on track so that there is better adherence. But as we said, as I noted, not all non-adherence relates to just the machines. There are other reasons, and we couldn't, once you start taking into all those other factors, the likely outcome and outcomes of reduced utilization of nursing facilities and inpatient utilization goes down.
All right, thank you.
I must say, and I'm afraid she might be watching because my mom likes to watch the Cal channel, but my brothers and I have shopped for these and actually experimented with some of them. Right. And we've personally experienced some of the difficulties of, I'm choosing my words because Mom's watching, getting her to adhere to the process. It's really sort of interesting. Any other questions? Okay. With that, I think what we'll do is take a break here. When we come back at precisely 1 o'clock, we'll do the SSI item, and then we'll go to public comment. Thank you.